Good morning, all. We have a set of panel speakers for you today. Thanks for attending. Just to cover off, as with all financial advice and discussions, there's disclaimers, and you'll see one at the bottom page here. Basically, what it means is that the information we're giving today is delivered by the people that are talking about it, and it is not specific to your personal requirements necessarily. So if there's something in there that you feel is important to you or you want to learn more about, please seek the advice of the people in the meeting. And if you were to run off and do something that didn't quite work out based on the information you heard today without seeking that advice, obviously you're on your own. So now that we've got that underway, we've got a great panel of speakers for you today, and I'm really looking forward to learning a bit about this part of the market. We've had a lot of changes in the home loan world and first home buyer market, KiwiSaver, so it should be a pretty exciting webinar for all of us, and I'm sure we'll all learn something here. The list is, as you see, hopefully on your screen. We've got Lance Ashley, experienced Saturn Advice financial advisor based down in Christchurch. He'll sort of be talking about the view of all this from a financial advice perspective and general overview of the various components, and then we'll work into a more specialized discussion around how KiwiSaver can help you in this first home buyer market, and also the importance of KiwiSaver. Ilma Mani will deliver that for you. Stuart Dorr, he'll have a big piece of this with the mortgage world. There's a lot going on in that, including the new credit rules and a interest rate increase from the Reserve Bank hot off the table yesterday. And then rounding off, Sarah Hartley will be there to talk about how this all comes together from a legal perspective when you get to the point of actually getting a contract on a house, or prior to a contract on a house, what you need to be aware of. So without any further ado, I think first off, can we just have a quick hands up or something in the chat to say that we are actually being heard out there, and also that you can see the screen, please. Yep, all good, wonderful. All right, we'll kick it into gear with Lance to start off with, and if the other presenters maybe could mute in the meantime, that would be helpful. Thank you. All over to you, Lance.
Yes, thanks, John. Welcome, everybody. Look, I'm just briefly going to talk about KiwiSaver and the fact that, look, it's an ideal savings vehicle for your first home. Most of you will have an employer contribution going in, so your employer is helping you save for your first home, which is great. And also the government tax credits, which are kicking on an annual basis, and you can use those as well. I think a really good advantage with KiwiSaver is the money comes out of your salary before you even see it, which is a really good, easy way of saving. I think we'll all agree. I'm going to pass on to Elma later on, and she's the KiwiSaver expert, and she's going to talk more about effective strategies in terms of utilising your KiwiSaver for your first home deposit. So look, a couple of key messages I'd like to talk about. One is, obviously, KiwiSaver is a lock-in. And I think as a financial advisor, it's really important you don't put all your eggs in one basket, and you don't put all the money into your KiwiSaver account. And look, the reason for that is you may actually decide that, you're not going to buy a house, you're going to defer that for various reasons, and you might want to travel overseas, or like a lot of young people are doing these days, you might want to start up a business. And obviously, KiwiSaver is a lock-in, and you wouldn't be able to get those funds out for your business or to travel. So I think it's important to spread your savings, and you've got other options like, managed funds, bank deposits, term deposits, cash accounts, and they're quite liquid. And by that, I mean you can get access to your funds within a short period of time. And look, at the end of the day, if you do decide to go ahead with the house purchase and not do anything else, you can utilize those savings as well, along with your KiwiSaver account. So that would be a thing to have to think about. Another key issue is really your investment time frame. So when you're looking to buy a house, is it in the next 12 months, the next 5 years, the next 10 years? And that will really determine how much investment risk you can afford to take on. And by that I mean how much exposure to growth assets. So we're talking about shares. And we've seen, haven't we, this quarter, how global share markets have been going up and down with various things happening in the world with COVID and what the Russians and other people have been up to. So you can take a loss with shares in the short term, and it's really important to have the investment time frame to recover from any losses. So I think this is where a financial advisor can come in and be able to talk to him or her and just determine have you got the right investment mix in terms of shares, bonds and cash for the investment time frame of where you're going to need that money to enable you to achieve your investment goals. Now, I remember when COVID first struck back in 2020, I was watching, I think it was TV3 News at the time, and there was an unfortunate young man on TV. He was in KiwiSaver, and quite rightly he was going to use the KiwiSaver for his deposit for his first home. Look, unfortunately, he hadn't taken any advice, and he was still in a high-risk growth portfolio, so a really high weighting to shares. The markets took a tumble with COVID, and he was down $8,000 on his growth portfolio. And unfortunately, that meant that he couldn't go ahead and buy that first home. So it's really important that you get advice that you're in the right investment mix for the time frame when you're looking to buy a property. Just going to briefly talk about budgeting. Now, I think budgeting is always a difficult discipline, even for financial advisors, but it is a good exercise to work out where your money is going, and you might be quite surprised how much you're spending on coffees, takeaway meals, dinners out, that sort of thing. So it is a good discipline to have a look at that. Look, the site I promote, it's an independent site, it's a retirement commissioner's site. It's sorted.org.nz. You can go on there and work out your budget and maybe look at some areas where you can save some money to enable you to save more for your house. So have a look at that. Also, have a look at the income side as well. I think people forget about that. There's an opportunity to get a promotion at work. There's an opportunity to do some overtime, maybe a second job on the weekend to lift the income side as well. So looking to maybe restrict some of your spending, but also maybe able to increase your income in terms of saving for a property. Look, I'm now going to pass over to Alma at National Capital. She's the KiwiSaver expert, and she's going to talk about how you can best utilise your KiwiSaver account to get into your first home. Thanks, Alma.
Thank you, Lance. I'm glad you touched on the fact that the right investment mix is important, because what I'm going to talk about is going to be the different types of funds that are available in KiwiSaver. Whether you're going to use your KiwiSaver for the full deposit amount or to supplement part of it, there are many options available for you. And the returns that you will need, the amount of time that you've got on your side, and the contributions that you are putting are all going to give us an idea of how long it will take you to reach your goal, and also what type of fund you need to be in. So, and that amount of time that you have on your side is different for everyone. And the reason it's different for everyone is because the deposit goal is different. The tolerance that you have to the ups and downs that you will encounter in your balance, based on how many growth assets you have in those portfolio mix, that will be different. Also, the balance that you initially have in there will be different from one person to the other. So what we do is we take all of these things into consideration, and we formulate a strategy that is unique to the individual. To give you an example, someone that is looking to save 50 grand for their first home deposit, and they've got 40 grand in there already, it is highly likely that based on the contributions that they're putting in, it'll take them 1 to 2 years to get where they need to be. But this person is a growth investor, and we're telling them, because you only have a year or two, you don't have the time to take on more risk than you need to, more volatility than you need to. The ups and downs in the market are more likely to affect you at the point where you've reached your deposit, but you want to withdraw the money, but all of a sudden there is a drop in the market and you are down those $9,000 that you mentioned, for example, with that gentleman, and you can't all of a sudden purchase your dream home, and you have to wait for the market to come up, which it will. It always does. It's just a point of, do you have the time to wait it out? And if you don't, then that's where this strategy of putting your money perhaps in a cash fund, the current balance that you've got now, to put it in a cash fund will come in handy. And if you still want to reach for those returns that a growth fund will give you, we have an option for you. We will have the option for you to preserve what you've got now and also put all of your new contributions, let's say the money that's going in from today onwards, into that growth fund, and find the right balance for you so that the investor in you is appeased, and also protecting the money that you have now in order to be able to purchase that house in a year's time or 2 years' time, and make that 50 grand all together and put it and pull it out when the time comes. So that's why it's important to speak to someone that has experience, like a financial advisor, in order to find the right balance and the right strategy for you, because there are so many options available, and sometimes it can be a little overwhelming even. So where can you find financial advice in terms of KiwiSaver advice? For this particular question, there are many options as well. You could go to the provider themselves. The provider themselves will have different types of funds available. They will, however, just give you advice on the funds that they've got available. Someone from Milford is not going to tell you to go to Fisher, or vice versa. So if you want a little bit more variety, you could go also to a financial advisor, an independent financial advisor themselves. They will generally have a little bit more variety, but not too much. Somewhere maybe 1, 2, 3 different providers that they work with. So they will tend to pair you with one of the providers that they've got available to them. The other option is to go somewhere like Saturn Advice, and they will have to spend the time researching your situation and also all the different providers available in the market to make that pairing. Now, often someone like Saturn will actually refer the client to someone like National Capital, because it is costly for the client and for the company to do all this research in order to give you the best option available in the market and independent advice. So someone like National Capital comes in because our expertise lies in KiwiSaver, so we research not just 1, 2, or 3, but 10, 15 KiwiSavers at the same time. So we've got a much wider range of choice and a better ability to match you with the right provider and the right strategy. Now, the way that operates is, for example, you fill out our KiwiSaver Health Check questionnaire. You give us a little bit of details in terms of what deposit you're looking to save, and also a little bit of what your investor profile is going to be. What is your tolerance to the ups and downs that you're likely to encounter? And we come to a point of discussion with you and give you the right strategy, because it's very important for you to have the right strategy and also the right provider. It's important for your values and the provider's values to match, because the more you like the provider and the strategy, the more likely you are to stay the course and succeed in your goal. So that's why it's important to speak with a KiwiSaver advisor or a financial advisor in order to find the best options for you and make it work for your personal situation. And I will now be passing on to our mortgage advisor, the expert Stuart Dole from Mortgage Express. Thank you.
Hey, Stuart, could I just jump in a second there? I forgot to mention to the listeners that if they do have questions, and there's quite a lot of content coming through from our panel speakers today, please, on your left-hand side, just click on the question button and we'll do our best to address those questions at the end of the presentations. Thank you. Over to you, Stuart.
Thank you. I'm a mortgage broker, or a mortgage advisor these days, as they say. First home buyers, it's quite exciting times, but it's quite a minefield as well. You don't know what you don't know. So first recommendation is to go for a pre-approval. So you know exactly what you can afford when you're looking for a house, and you can act on that house because you've got the pre-approval. So property market moves pretty quickly these days. Firstly, the banks are looking at two things. Firstly, they're looking at you and basically your income, how much of a deposit you've got, how much debt you have, your spending habits. They're looking to see how they can responsibly lend you the money to buy the property that you're looking for, and that you can pay it back without too much pain, so to speak. Secondly, they're looking actually at the property that you want to buy. They're looking to make sure the property is worth what you want to pay for it, whether it's you can get insurance on it. There was quite a few issues in Christchurch after the earthquakes with EQC and things like that, and buying properties. So they're making sure that the property you buy isn't going to put you in a worse financial position than previously owning a property, so to speak. The big thing at the moment everyone's talking about is CCCFA. Now that's the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act. It's quite a mouthful. That came to play on the 1st of December, and it's been all over the news since. All these horror stories of people spending money at Kmart and all of a sudden being turned down for a mortgage, etc., etc. It's a piece of legislation that came in. Part of that legislation is a thing called the Responsible Lending Code. And that's what's been affecting the banks and the way they scrutinise people's expenditure now. It sits in under the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act. And basically, this act has basically told the banks they need to actually go through your last 3 months of expenses, line by line by line, to make sure you can afford the mortgage. Previously, there was a lot of grey area. We would look at your expenses, and you might have things on there like coffees, eating out, KFC, Netflix. A lot of those things the bank wouldn't worry too much about, for the sheer fact that when people get a mortgage, their spending habits change and they start to really look at paying the mortgage, and they forego those treats. The mortgage always comes first because that's the roof over your head, so to speak. So it's been in place now for a few months. People have been getting turned down. The banks will look very seriously at spending. They were kind of already doing it to a little bit, but now it's a lot more serious. The banks will suffer some big fines if they get it wrong, so which is why they're doing the letter of the law. They're looking, I think they're readdressing the code at the moment, so hopefully we might see some freeing up of that in the next few months. But talking to people, what I've been saying is take 3 months, live like you've already got your mortgage. Cut out those coffees if you can. take your lunch to work, etc. Just get your bank statements for 3 months looking as tight as possible. If you're paying $500 in rent at the moment and you know your mortgage is going to be $660 a week instead of the $500, show that you're allowing for that extra. So the bank are looking at it to see that you can pay your mortgage once you get it, and that's the main thing that they're concerned about. So just show that you've got good practices in place for 3 months. Get the mortgage. You can slowly slip back into some old habits if you need to, but the banks are looking very seriously at it. So we want your statements and that to look great for the banks. So we can move you on to the next stage, so to speak. The deposit that I said also works hand in hand. There's a thing called LVR, loan to value ratio. First home buyers have opportunities to basically use a much smaller deposit to get into a first home. Currently, the banks are basing it on an 80% LVR. So that means you have to have 20% of the deposit, and the bank will loan you the other 80% to buy the property. Through the first home grant in Kia Ora, you are eligible to go in and have a 5% deposit, and 95% will come in from the bank via Kia Ora. Now, there's certain things that are in place there, like there's house caps. So Christchurch, to buy an existing property, you're looking at a $500,000 house cap, or to build, it's a $550,000 price cap. But that $500,000 price cap, that means you just need to come to the party with $25,000 pretty much. There are a few things in there as well, like the first home grant allows you to possibly get up to $5,000 grant from Kia Ora via the government, so to speak. It's dependent on your KiwiSaver. So providing you've been contributing in KiwiSaver for 3 years, they will look at you. You can get $1,000 for 3 years, up to a maximum of $5,000. So if there's two of you looking for a property and you've both got KiwiSaver, you may be eligible for $10,000 that can go towards your deposit, which is nothing to be sneezed at, really. It's great money. And that doubles if you're actually building. A bit hard to build in the current prices and environment for the price caps, but building, they would give you $10,000 instead of $5,000. So effectively, you'd have $20,000 extra for your deposit. And this goes hand in hand with your KiwiSaver. You can utilise your KiwiSaver for deposit. As Alma and Lance have been talking about, it's a great thing. You can actually go there, get your KiwiSaver out, providing you're eligible to it. You haven't used it before. Get the first home grant. Two of you might have $20,000 each in your KiwiSaver, then you get another $5,000 each for your first home grant. You're going into a bank with a deposit of $50,000, which is 90% LVR, so you're under that 95% threshold. And then the banks will look at that. They'll reassess your spending habits and everything like that, and hopefully you'll be in line for a pre-approval. So there's other rules with the first home grant and that mortgage brokers will talk you through, but it's a great way to get into property on a cheaper scale, so to speak. If that wasn't in place, that $500,000 property, you're looking at a $100,000 deposit. So effectively, you're coming in with $25,000 deposit. Some of that can be government help, and it's a great way to get at your first house, or on the property ladder, as they say. Basically, once you've got your pre-approval, you can get your house. It's much easier, as I said, to get your pre-approval. It's quite difficult time frame wise. Sometimes you'll see a house, it could be a deadline sale. You don't know how much you can put on an offer because you really have no idea of your finances until you've talked to us. You might put an offer on, it may be accepted, but there could be some reason behind the scenes why the bank won't lend you that money. So it just saves you a lot of mucking around if you know exactly what you can place on a house. It turns you pretty much not a window shopper anymore. You can actually go into the store and buy. So even though the CCCFA has slowed down the market a little bit, The banks will look at your application. They always charge a higher rate when they're looking at your personal circumstances. So the current interest rates may be 4%. The banks are going to test you at 6% or 6.5%, which is like a test rate. They're already trying to make sure that if the interest rates go up, like they just have, and they will be, that you can still afford your mortgage. The last thing the bank wants is for you not to be able to afford your mortgage and you to have to basically walk away in mortgage sales, etc. And that's where this whole responsible lending piece comes into play. So there's a lot there, and there's a lot more behind the scenes as well. So all I would say is give a mortgage broker a call. They can take the time to talk you through everything so you're on the same page. They're going to tailor things for you, and they work pretty much. Mortgage brokers work for you, or mortgage advisors work for you. They don't work for the banks. You don't pay them usually. The banks will pay them on settlement of your loan. And so it's in their interest to look after you all the way through, right from the pre-approval stage and gathering your information, helping you through the sale and purchase agreements for properties, looking at the property you're trying to buy, maybe helping you with the amount you're going to offer, right through to settlement, which is when the money transfers and you get the keys, and that night you're kind of standing in a lounge or a living room looking around thinking it's mine. And believe me, it's a great feeling when you buy your first house. So it's not a hard process. It can be a bit daunting, but yeah, have a chat to professionals and it makes life a lot easier for you. So a big part of what we do, or what people need as well, is talking to good legal representation or legal advice when it comes to buying property, and especially building property in this day and age. And that's where we go to people like Sarah down the end here, who is excellent at what she does.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Okay, so I thought I'd talk about the issues that I have crop up quite regularly with first home buyers. So I act for a lot of first home buyers, and I actually really enjoy it because there's nothing more rewarding than calling that client and telling them that they've settled, like Stu was saying. So yeah, I like to get involved really early if I can, and if they let me, because I think understanding what you're doing from a legal point of view, we can assume a lot of people know things, and what I've learned is that first home buyers want all the information really early on, so I like to do that right at the start. The issues that I've had lately, clients of mine, is just the competitive market. So auctions in particular are the most common way of selling a property at the moment. That's not great for first home buyers because if you've never bought before, you wouldn't understand, but the other way it used to be, and the most common way, is you put your offer in, you included conditions, and you had time to do your checks and things after you got your price accepted. So you had that little bit of a fallback position. Whereas now with an auction, you have to turn up there and you have to check everything and be ready to go. You have to have unconditional finance, you have to have insurance arranged, you have to check EQC building reports, and also you have to have engaged a solicitor to check the limb and title before you go ahead. So that's where the cost lies, us doing those checks in advance. And of course, if you turn up to auction and the property goes miles above what you can pay, then you consider it a wasted cost. So that's really disheartening for first home buyers. So I try and, we do deals to make it as easy as possible for people to get those checks, because what we really don't want is people going in there without the checks because they're worried about the costs and buying something that ends up being a bit of a dud or something that's a problem for them in future. The other kind of format of buying that's coming across my desk a lot is buying off the plans. So that can be, it's a kind of very generic term, but they can be house land packages, buying a section and then building on it later, or effectively just engaging with a builder who's nabbed a bit of land that they're likely to buy in future, and they'll get it all contracted at that time. That's tricky as well because you're buying something that doesn't exist, and the person you're buying from, the building company or the builder, likely doesn't have ownership of that land. The developer still does. So the developer's controlling everything in the background, and then here you've got a contract with the builder that you need to make sure is as tight as it can be given that we don't actually know what the end result's going to be from a legal point of view with the title. That is requiring a lot of time and effort to check those agreements. We're getting building contracts through that say they're fixed, or verbally they're told they're fixed, but they're not really. So checking that is the case, because that has major finance implications. So they're important ones. So if you are kind of being approached or approaching a building company to buy a property, you really do need to get that checked as early on as possible to make sure it is what you're expecting. So that leads me to when you should probably engage a solicitor. So ideally, it would be before you commit to anything, but we are pretty realistic that in this day and age, you have to move quickly. So if you do happen to find a property that's not auction, it's just on for a price or it says offers or whatever, and you're in there in the weekend and you need to sign up now to beat someone else, you just need to think about conditions, and that's those conditions I was referring to before. So you can allow 10 working days for finance. You can put in conditions where you have time to check the title and limb or engage a solicitor to do so. You have time to get insurance arranged, get your own building report done, and check that the EQC work's all being completed and you're not going to be finding undetected repairs needed later. The reason being is that the title, in particular, what first home buyers don't often know is there are different forms of title. So there's what we call a fee simple or a freehold title. That's the best form of title, and that's yours, you own it. Then there's a cross lease, which you own it, but you are sharing the underlying land with another owner on that same site. So there are rules that are registered on those titles, so you need to understand what those rules are. There's also a body corporate or unit title structure that comes with fees, maintenance fees and things like that, which can come as a surprise to someone. So again, that's why if you can get that advice early on, you understand that the price you're putting in should reflect what type of title you're getting as well. So they're all conditions you should put in if you had to quickly over the weekend. And then also a solicitor's approval clause, which basically means that you can sign up an agreement and then you can send it through on Monday and we can have a look at it. And if it's completely incorrect or not in your best interest, you have the right to try and change it or walk away if you're not happy. So yeah, as I said, early advice is best, but we can work with you to make sure that you can put an offer in as quickly as you need to. Another thing that I've had asked recently is whether people can buy their first home with a friend. And in short, absolutely you can. And I actually don't know why more people don't consider this. In particular, if you're living in a flatting arrangement and you work really well with someone and you're both looking for a first home, then pooling resources is a good option from a legal point of view. You can own in different shares. You don't have to own 50-50. You can have 20%, 80% or whatever, and it can be registered on the title accordingly. And then what we'd always do, and I'm actually working on one for clients at the moment, is a property sharing agreement, and that becomes your Bible of ownership. So that includes covering off how bills are paid. So if you own different shares, like 20-80, would you be paying the bills 50-50 because you're both living there, or 20-80? Like just going through all these points at the start makes life easier. So how bills are paid, what happens if one party wants to move out, if one's buying out the shares of the other, how do you value those shares? So an actual format to go through. And if another one that comes up quite often is someone wants to improve the property, the other person can't afford to do so or doesn't want to, how do you resolve that? So how do you move forward through all those challenges? And if that's all covered off in a property sharing agreement at the start and you've invested money in getting one, then you'll find it's really easy and it's a great way of kind of both of you getting in the property market without too many challenges. So also parents assisting children. So a really common one at the moment, and as we all know, it's getting more expensive. So it works really well, but again, you've got to have those conversations at the start as to how it's structured. So the advice to parents is probably going to be quite different to the advice to the children. So it very much depends on who you're acting for as to what I'd be advising. But as long as that's happened early on, you can cover it off. So you want to, if your parents are offering you some money to put in towards your first home, say, awesome, thank you, nab that. But also tell them to go and see their lawyer or whatever, just get that advice on how they want to secure it or not secure it. So if you're the parent, you need to think about looking after your investment in that property. So do you want to share in that property? So that's possible. You can literally own it like we were talking about with friends owning. You go on the title, it's your investment, you sell for more money, you take that share of the profit, and you've got control as well. So the property can't be sold or refinanced or anything like that without your say. It also has no exposure to the Relationship Property Act, so that's a big one for parents. So you give a lump sum to a child, you don't want half of that to go to a partner if they split. So if you own that share, that's not exposed at all. The downside is that bright line test. I don't know if people are familiar with it, but these days, if you buy and sell a property that's not your main home within 10 years, the profit you make on that can be taxed. So parents need to consider that because that obviously won't be their main home and that share could be taxed. May not be relevant to them, they might not be worried, they might consider that worthwhile protecting their money. Another option is a loan with a mortgage secured. So this is they could be officially the bank, if you know what I mean. So they lend the money, there's a mortgage registered on the title, which gives you the control over the title, and it can include interest payments if you want it to or whatever. The downside to that one is that the child is probably unlikely to be able to get a mortgage from a bank as well. So unless you're advancing the whole amount and acting as the bank, then that might be a little bit fraught. Or you can have a loan with no security. So it's a loan. It doesn't mean no security, doesn't mean it doesn't get repaid. It just means that it's not related to that house as such. So that house could be sold, refinanced, whatever. The debt is between you and the person you lent the money to. So you would have to chase them for that money if things went horribly wrong. And that also keeps it out of the relationship property sphere as well. And then there is the gift. So the gift is tricky for parents because it effectively is, you can't claw it back in general. You can add conditions to a gift, but they're very hard to enforce and an sort of legal minefield if you said, actually, I gifted that only for that house, I want that back. Well, that's really hard unless that's clearly documented, and then that will have implications with your finance application as well if you've got conditions in there. So you just need to be aware if you gift that money, there's no guarantee that your child has to use that for the home. No, they could sell the home, they could refinance, go on a holiday, buy a car. You've got no say over what happens to that money after it's gone. And it falls into that relationship property sphere. So child moves in with someone, they become de facto, split, half of that effectively could go to that person. There are all these other little behind the scenes implications that we could go through, but that would take me a lot of time. But in general, you just have to think about different protections versus the risks and how you want to structure that. And again, if that's all done in advance, no problem at all. We can cover that off. We just don't like any surprises the day before settlement and having to run around and figure that out later. So yeah, everything is awesome and helpful if you can tell us early on in the process. But yeah, if you are going to put an offer in on a house, or you want to buy a house, have a look and see if it's an option. So do you need to do all your checks and pay those costs in advance? Is it a deadline sale? So you can put an offer in with conditions. However, your offers will all be opened at the same time by the person selling, and if you have a lot of conditions in there and someone has none, then you're going to miss out. So you put your best foot forward in that instance. So you work out how much costs and time you want to spend in advance. You can have the general offer that you can put in. There are a few private sales happening online at the moment. You might see that on Trade Me and things like that. No problem with that. You've just got to make sure you've definitely got those early advice related to the property, and there probably will be valuations and things needed, so a little bit more of a finance implication, but it's not something you can't do. And then that buying off the plans, which I talked about earlier. So just look at how it's being sold first and foremost and the costs that you'll incur in that regard. Have a chat about the different types of properties and what one it is, and we'll talk you through that if you needed to. You need to know the dates you can achieve, like the finance dates, settlement dates, moving dates, all that kind of stuff, because everyone has different requirements. Chattels, checking your chattels. If it's something that can be picked up and removed and it's not in the chattels list, there's no guarantee it will be there on the day you take over. So we get clients to be really careful with that as well. And just balancing up the amount of time and cost you want to spend in advance and checking things out versus the risk of losing the property. So it is a bit of a balancing game, but I always are having that chat to that client before they go into an offer situation, and we can work through that and see where your risk appetite lies, I guess you could say. So that would be my advice, is just to get everything checked as early as possible. have those chats, as everyone said, and get the right advice for you, and I'm sure you'll be successful.
Great, thanks, Sarah. A lot of detail in there, and obviously a few minds that people can stand on the way through the process. So we have a couple of questions here. Just before I get on to them, I suppose looking at a bit of a roundup of the four presenters here, very clear that preparation is key, and not leaving things to the last minute. So if you're looking to maximize the value of your KiwiSaver, then you're looking to get advice. Make sure you're in the right KiwiSaver, as Ilma says, right time frames. At a point of you want growth to build your value of your asset, but then at some point, depending on your timing, there may be a requirement to readjust that. And the experience of an advisor around that is obviously very important. To also, the advisors will tend to bounce questions to you that you're not likely to question yourself on. So when we all like to think we know a reasonable amount of most things, but ultimately experience and people that are dealing with this day to day tend to know a little bit more about these things than we do when we buy a house maybe once every 5 or 10 years. And as all the speakers have pointed out, the regulatory market is changing all the time. So where I think years ago things were a lot simpler, now you've got rules around rental property ownership that then makes it taxable, non-taxable, bright line tests, new build versus existing home, auctions, and all these sorts of things. So yeah, key takeout: get advice from experienced people, and that will help to get a great outcome when you're looking to get to that first home. And the preparation, we can't understate that, and all presenters have said that. And this might not be 6 months before or other, depending on which part of the process you're talking about. Another interesting point in Sarah's side is for the parents, like we're seeing, with the prices of houses and things like that, certainly in the financial advice business, we start to hear from parents that are wanting to help their kids to get into houses, and the structuring around that, and also the implications of taking that money out of their control and ability to use can have implications. So talking to the financial advisor, talking to the lawyer to make sure that you understand, depending on which way you're going to make that money available, the implications if something goes wrong in your own environment. You may not be able to pull that money back if you needed it for something. So I think that's really important as well. Couple of questions in here. One is probably a combination between Stu and Sarah, but Stu, if you're buying a property and it's a build, land and build agreement, and it may not be finished for 18 months or 2 years or some time distant in the future, how long does the mortgage approval last? And what happens if the rules change or something, you've signed up, put a deposit on it, and where are you there? So maybe that might be a half Stu, half Sarah question.
Yeah, look, when you're doing a build, the banks always like the title to be issued within 12 months of you getting your lending. If you're looking to get lending on a build and the title's not going to be issued for another 14 months, the bank just doesn't really like looking at it because a lot can change in that time frame. A lot of the builds I've been dealing with at the moment, luckily the titles have been coming up a few months after the funds have been sought. Then they prefer you to, the build to be complete within about 12 months of issuing the funds on the land, etc., etc. This is purely, again, a lot of rules can change in that time. They're going to stick with the rules they've given you, but if it goes out over 12 months and that, they may be looking at looking at your finances again just prior to finishing the build. But and they're looking to see whether your circumstances have changed. Like you start the build process, you've got 2 jobs, everything's going really well. All of a sudden, somebody gets pregnant. Income's off the table for a while. Your circumstances have changed, and that's why the banks don't like those big, long time frames and slow, long builds. So, but they will look at everything. It's just within that 12 months kind of scope they prefer. So, but you see anything like that?
Yeah, no, it is tricky. So I would say that the only real protection from a purchaser, so if you confirm you go unconditional, you are legally committed to go ahead with it. So they won't be too concerned about that whole 1 year thing. You are legally committed to still carry on, but we are trying really hard to get sunset dates included, which basically means a clause that says if title hasn't issued in such a period of time, the purchaser has the right to cancel and get their deposit back. They're hard to get over the line at the moment, but they're starting to appear again. So that's really what we do try to do as a best case scenario. And then I would also always ask for confirmation of where the title process is with the vendor. So if you're buying one from a building company, I would ask them to ask the developer where they're up to. Have they got an LT plan? This is all technical terms you don't need to know, but effectively it helps us determine how likely the title is to issue in the next year. So that's what we'd inquire at the start as well.
One other quick thing, banks are looking favourably at new builds. They are looking to go out from 80% to 90% the new builds for lending, so you're not having to come up with as much deposit. However, if you're above that 80% threshold, it's pretty much has to be a fixed price contract build, so no changes along the way. You can't be building along and then decide you want to put a flasher bath or a bigger kitchen area type thing. It needs to be planned so the bank knows exactly what they're paying out for the progress payments, etc., until the completion of the build, because they've kind of given you a bit more leeway to get you above the 80%, and they don't want any surprises. They don't want the build to finish and all of a sudden you still owe 50,000 because you've changed the spec of the build a little bit. And the first thing they're going to say is, well, how are you going to get this extra 50,000 when we tested you the first time? You were right on the limits of what you could lend. So it's just a little safety net for the bank as well. Anything below 80%, they're a bit more free for changes and plans and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. Another question we've had is also into the legal department. You're getting a bit of a workout here, Sarah. With the Parents Loaning to Kids and Relationship Property Act, obviously you clearly pointed out if the parent's not loaning 100%, the bank's going to want first mortgage and potentially not too interested in allowing a second mortgage to be registered against the property. So what would be the most common mechanism you would see currently around this for people?
Usually, to be honest, it's usually just a loan, an unsecured loan, and that just sits there and can be called in effectively at any time. So it's structured by way of a deed of acknowledgement of debt, and it includes the option to charge interest. You don't have to, but it is structured as a legally binding deed in that regard. And occasionally, not that often, but you can have a right to caveat the title, which isn't as secure as a mortgage as such, but you do actually need the bank to consent to that as well, technically, and they do on occasion allow that. So you do have a little bit of a claw on the title, so to speak, but the actual deed. And there is a lot of trust involved in the lending of money between parents and children most of the time, but that does keep it out of the relationship property sphere as well.
Yeah, and obviously if the relationship between the parties owning the house turns a little bit sour, the ability to collect loans potentially down the track could be challenged as well.
Yeah, as in if they don't have enough equity, I suppose. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. If they're looking at a new build now, trying to get the equity in a property is going to take a time frame, and if the relationship, disintegrates, and then they have to sell with the costs of selling the property and things like that, the balance in there might not be enough to pay out the loan.
Yeah, but in the kind of hierarchy, it would be bank, then parents, debts, and then parents, and then probably not much left to be split between the two. So at least it wouldn't go in the wrong direction, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay. Definitely require good advice in the lending of money from the parent's perspective, or anybody's perspective that's lending. When you talked about the structuring of the loans between parties, that was quite an interesting point you made there. If you've got a flatting situation, or you've got, a group of younger people that are all sort of in a similar stage of life, do you see many of those sort of sharing arrangements?
I have seen the odd one come through. I think so. I don't know much about how the finance side of that would work, so I'm not sure whether that hinders whether they can get loans approved if it's friends purchasing.
Yeah, they can still get loans. They're looking at their individual circumstances, again, the income, the debt. I'm working with a couple of sisters at the moment that are trying to buy a house together, and they're kind of getting assessed separately for the same goal, so that the lending will be there, providing they fit all the criteria for that lending, and then how they structure that house comes to the legal side when one of them's bringing a lot more money to the table than the other one. So the ownership would probably be a 60-40 split for this one that I'm looking at. But it does happen more and more. Again, it's a trust thing. A lot can happen with friends buying a house together, and all of a sudden third parties come into the mix, and but it's getting people across the line, as is, I suppose, parents. I see a lot more gifting of money these days. Getting a gift certificate from the parents saying that they're going to give the children X amount of money to get them across the threshold. It might take them out of that first home buyer's caps into a more expensive house, but it gets them across the line. So
I would say it's probably also to do with agreeing on the house they want. Sometimes that can be the challenge. So the ones I have had work really well is they've bought the house from the landlord, or various situations like that. So they're already living in their house and they like it and they're staying there. So sometimes that might be a reason, or they go to their parents and say they're buying with a friend, and then the parents actually say, I'll stump up so it doesn't get complicated, and they end up parting and going different ways. But I still think it's a good idea for people that don't have that parental help available.
Yeah, that's a great tip for the younger listeners on this call for sure, because that's not something that you hear a lot about, that sort of strategy. So just looking also, Stu, you mentioned a number of things through Kaingaroa and grants here, there and everywhere from the government that people are able to get if it is their first home.
Yeah.
Aside from ringing the mortgage broker and asking them to run through the list, is there a central source or a resource somewhere where people can sort of start that groundwork?
If you type in your search bar just first home grant, you'll be taken to the Kaingaroa website. Kaingaroa is the old Housing New Zealand. There's basic information on there. It is hard to get the in-depth information. You can ring them as well, and they'll talk you through a few things. I recently had a client that was going for his second chance. He owned a property in a previous relationship, didn't use his KiwiSaver then because it wasn't around. Now he's going for a new property with a new partner, and he wants to use his KiwiSaver. So we have to get Kaingaroa pretty much to sign off that he is in the same boat as a first home buyer. So he can take that form to his bank and then they'll look for a provider, I should say, KiwiSaver provider. So then they will look at whether they're happy to release those funds for him. And he tried a couple of times and he got turned down the first time. And when I rang queried it, he had put down too much on the way of assets, which he didn't need to put down. But it says nowhere about what to put on the form. So you can definitely get the information. The call centre there is great as well for answering questions, or talk to somebody like us. Just ring up an advisor, have a chat, find out. For 5 minutes, you're going to get a lot of information. So.
Yeah, definitely the experience there. So if someone's been to the website, they've had a bit of a look round, and they're saying, yeah, this sounds like I can pull a bit of this together. I've got my KiwiSaver. Hopefully you've talked to Ilma or Lance or somebody, and you've managed to get a good KiwiSaver balance together. At that point in time, you are, or most mortgage brokers are, happy to take a call from somebody and talk about, right, let's see where you can get to from a pre-approval perspective.
Even before that stage, we're talking to people, and just even in having a chat, we're finding out how long they've been in with their KiwiSaver provider or in KiwiSaver, just asking those open-ended questions, getting them to talk about their circumstances. And if they're looking at that, the government grants, and they're happy with the cap for their region, like Ashburton's 400,000, you can still buy some decent property in Ashburton for 400,000. So they can actually go on to the Canberra website and fill out the pre-approval form, and they'll get an email back stating, hey, based on what you've told us, you're eligible for, say, 4,000 or 3,000 or 5,000, depending on their circumstances. If they're buying a house for somebody else, you put the other person's details on that same form, and it's a tick box whether they're using their first home grant as well. Pretty easy to follow. You'll get the confirmation, and it just gives you an indication that, hey, look, we've got this extra $10,000 available for our deposit, so to speak. But we go through all that with people as well. There's a few forms. They have to show ID. They have to download their MyIR for the last 12 months to show that they've been paying into their KiwiSaver and how long they've been with that provider, etc. So there's a few things they have to get prepared before they go in there, but we just generally talk to them, and a lot of people are very happy and capable of doing it themselves.
Great. We've got a few minutes left here, and a question for Ilma. To maximise the KiwiSaver and make sure that you're eligible for the grants and things like that, is there any things that people need to be aware of as part of the process of their KiwiSaver? Is there time frames before you can withdraw the KiwiSaver, or amounts of money you need to contribute, or consistency of contribution?
So actually, Stuart brought up a good point. To add on to that, and then to elaborate a little bit, it's good that the grant is there and it's available, and it's important to look at it before, maybe even a year or two before you're ready to buy, because I have a client at the moment who's relying on that grant being part of her deposit, but we don't know yet. We're in the process of finding out whether she's eligible or not for it. So it's important to know that before you account for it in your as part of your deposit, because how much money you've got available, again, plays a role in the funds that you will be required to be in, and how much money you'll need to pull together. There is a minimum of 5 years, 3 to 5 years, depending on the situation, that you need to be in the KiwiSaver scheme. It doesn't have to be consecutive, but I actually have just sent an email to Kaingaora yesterday, and so I'm sorry I don't have the answer yet of how long you have to be consecutively contributing just before you're able to withdraw the money from the grant. We roughly have an idea of 6 months at least, but don't quote me on that because we haven't received a reply from them yet. So we haven't found out, but you do need to be 3 to 5 years contributing, not consecutively. It doesn't have to be, but as part of the KiwiSaver scheme for you to be eligible to apply for the grant.
And at least at this point in time, I think across all of the discussion, the more you have available in your KiwiSaver account or other savings, the closer you are to a deposit and the easier it is to get a loan. So, for an absolute minimum, if we had people listening that weren't consistently contributing, at the moment, the government still, or up until recently, unless that's changed, they still offer a contribution top up to the first 1,045 or 1,050 or something like that.
That's correct. They offer up to $512 for the person that's contributing a minimum of $1,050 roughly per year. And I mean, it's a great way for someone that's making a salary of, let's say, 40 grand roughly, that 3% contribution coming from them and that 3% contribution coming from the employer, that automatically qualifies them for that $500 that's coming from the government, and that's already 50% return on your investment. So that minimum contribution is a great idea, and it comes to about $20 a week.
And my understanding is also that if you have, for some reason, not been consistently contributing, as long as you get that minimum sum in via lump sum or other prior to the 30th of June, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
So you can pay it in one lump sum.
Put it in a one lump sum just before the tax year starts getting reviewed, and then
you'll get the government contribution.
You'll get the government contribution. If you don't match the 1,042, you'll still get some. You'll just get 50 cents on the dollar for the amount that you've contributed.
Great. All right. To be mindful of everybody's time and the people that have been kind enough to attend here today, I'm sure they've got great value out of it. If we haven't been able to answer your question specifically, we've got the information on the screen here. We have made a recording of this, so we will get the recording out to you, and I'm sure all of the panel would be more than happy to take an email or a phone call from you if you have specific questions to their specific professions. All right, thank you very much for attending to our listeners, and thank you for the team here and all the great information you've been able to hand over today. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.